Part 3, Chapter 4 of Short History of the Christian Church by John Fletcher Hurst. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 4. The German Reformation. Martin Luther, from his birth to the retirement in the Wartburg Castle, 1483 to 1520. All the Teutonic countries had been getting ripe for the great ecclesiastical revolt, and central Germany now became the theatre for the Reformation. The popular mind was so fully ready that the only great need now was a man of sufficient courage, ability, and singleness of purpose to become the representative of his generation. Martin Luther responded to the universal aspiration for a leader, to guide into new and safe paths. Luther was born in Eisleben, Saxony, November 12, 1483, and died in the same place February 18, 1546. His father, first a slate cutter in Mora, and then a miner in Eisleben, was a man of humble tastes and scanty means. He belonged to the peasant class. The boy Martin, in later life, recalled the fact that his mother used to carry on her back the wood necessary for the comfort of the humble home. In this son were combined the characteristics of both the northern and the southern German. There were the calm judgment, the solid sense, and the sturdy valor of the colder blood of the North, but with these he possessed a gentle, cheerful, and tuneful nature, a sympathetic and social feeling, which stood him in good stead in his later struggles. As a boy, he was fond of the village sports, had an ardent love for his friends and as keen an antipathy towards his foes, possessed a quaint and grotesque humor and innocent wit, and to the day of his death took pride in his lowly ancestry and modest home. His nature seemed to derive its very grandeur and ruggedness from the neighboring Harz Mountains, and its depth from the mines beneath his father's thatched cottage. When the burden of his great mission was upon him, and he was the trusted friend of princes and the learned, he was accustomed to say, "I am a peasant's son. My father, grandfather, and remote ancestors were nothing but veritable peasants." But little liberty was granted to the boy of genius and destiny. His parents made free use of the rod, and thereby nearly spoiled their child. The least indiscretion brought severe castigation. His mother once punished him, because of some trouble about a nut, until the blood flowed. In the years of his strong manhood, when looking back upon this harshness, he saw the mistake of his parents, and said, "My parents' severity made me timid. Their sternness and the strict life they led made me afterwards go into a monastery and become a monk. They heartily meant it well, but they did not understand the art of adjusting their punishments." But, with all the severity of the home, these parents seemed to recognize the genius of their son. They determined that he should have an education, and designed him for the law. In 1497 he was sent to Magdeburg, in order that he might prepare for the university. But the expense was too great for the means of his parents, and he was removed to Eisenach, where he could live with relatives and attend school at less expense. It was then the custom of the poorer scholars in Thuringia to go about the streets and sing at the doors of the people for alms. Young Martin needed such help, and a wealthy lady, Ursula Cotta, was so charmed by his singing that she took him to her own home, where he had the advantages of an excellent teacher. In 1501 he went to the University of Erfurt, one of the centres of humanistic learning in northern Europe. He here came in contact with the advancing learning of the times, and was captivated by it. Neither mind nor heart had rest. With great nervous power he went from one science to another, and mastered each with a thoroughness and dispatch which amazed the professors. The department which he made his specialty was philosophy. On finishing his course, and taking his degree as Master of Arts, he bade the world farewell, and in 1505 entered the Augustinian cloister as a monk. The resolution seemed to be instantaneous, but his later confessions reveal the fact that he had been led gradually, by certain providential experiences, such as the death of a friend at his side by lightning, to take this step. He now subjected himself to severe discipline, denied himself all comforts, tortured his body, and fasted and prayed to a degree that almost proved fatal to his life. But he kept at his studies, in this respect differing from his brethren, who said, "If this brother studies, he will rule us." The words were a prophecy which was literally fulfilled. In 1508, Luther was called to Wittenberg as professor. While in Erfurt, he had come to a knowledge of the Bible, and had seen the difference between the simple gospel and the life and practice of the Church of his times. His mind was in doubt. He continued his ascetic life, and waited for the light. The University of Wittenberg had been founded by Frederick the Wise in 1502, and, like Erfurt, was now alive with the new learning of the age. Here Luther had a field, the first of his life, for his remarkable powers. He carried with him the timidity of the monk, but the fire and magnetism of the master mind. He was so diffident that only the greatest persuasion could induce him to preach. "You will kill me," he said to Stampitz, who had been the cause of his call to Wittenberg. "I shall not go on with it for a quarter of a year." Luther had been in Wittenberg 2 years, when he started on a journey to Rome. To one of his thirsting mind and religious fervor, such an opportunity was hailed with inexpressible delight. He had been doubting the practices of the Church, but no thought of keen criticism had arisen in his mind. He was still the devoted servant of his order, the Augustines, and a firm and full believer in the one Roman Catholic Church. When he caught his first view of the Eternal City, he fell upon the earth, and, with uplifted hands, cried out, "I greet thee, Holy Rome, thrice holy from the blood of the martyrs which has been shed in thee." The scenes which now passed before his eyes had but little influence in strengthening his love for the Church. He saw too much ostentation and pride to satisfy his self-denying nature. While ascending the Scala Santa, or Pilate's staircase, as a reverent and penitential pilgrim, the words came to him, "The just shall live by faith." He descended the steps, left Rome, and betook himself back to Germany. But he did not repudiate the authority of the Roman Church at that time. Kostlin says, "The exhibition of ecclesiastical corruption which he saw did not at the time occasion any revolt in his mind." Luther was still a devoted monk, but had felt the power of a new life. He did not dream of separation from the Church. He continued his lectures on the Biblical books, and fascinated his hearers by the boldness and novelty of his views. His life now moved on without excitement or serious change for 7 years. All the while he was growing in the confidence of the students and in fame abroad. His lectures were attractive beyond those of any one else, while his sermons, differing by their plain speech and direct presentation of the truth from the current preaching, were heard with an intensity of interest new in Wittenberg, or any other part of Germany, since the Mystics. During this quiet interval a new indulgence was published in Germany, and the tickets of pardon were sold in the public places of the land. Between 1500 and 1517 no less than 5 indulgences extraordinary had been published, and put up for sale to any buyer. They were wonderfully successful. The money flowed in from every quarter. The cause of the indulgences was alleged to be for defense against the Turks, but it was a singular fact that it had to go by the very circuitous way of Rome and the papal treasure box. The bishops cried out, half in joy and half in complaint, against the weight of the silver, "100 weights of German coin fly light as feathers over the Alps, and no bearer of the heaviest burdens, not even Atlas himself, can drag such heaps of money. The sale of the indulgences aroused Luther's nature to a high pitch of excitement. He was now ready for his mission. He went over the whole case against Rome, as he saw it, and arraigned the Church in a bill of charges, which he called his 95 Theses. They were directed principally against the sale of indulgences, but they included the whole burden of Luther's soul. He insisted that the Church taught the truth, but that there were excrescences which must be removed. On October 31st, 1517, he nailed his theses to the door of the Schlosskirche of Wittenberg. Now began the storm which lasted until the day of his death. The theses were soon heard from in Rome, where the Pope wrote of him to the Elector of Saxony as that notorious son of wickedness. He was ordered to recant, but replied, "I cannot recall." He was ordered to Rome, but only wrote a respectful letter in reply to the command. He was summoned to a disputation in Leipzig in 1519 with Eck, where he attacked the doctrines of the primacy of the Pope, indulgences, and purgatory. The humanist Mosellanus thus described the young monk on this first great appearance before the world: "He was of medium height. His face and whole body were as thin as a skeleton, caused by long study and much care. His voice was clear. His address bore every mark of great learning and acquaintance with the Bible. His bearing was friendly and attractive. He was full of vitality, and calm and joyous amid the threats of his enemies, as one would be who undertakes great things with God's help. In controversy he was defiant and incisive, as a theologian ought to be." Luther left Leipzig with a deeper determination than ever to continue his work. He still had no thought of leaving the Church. He would be an obedient son and servant, and thought only of ever remaining in fellowship with the received faith. But he was carried on by the force of his convictions, and by some providential occurrences, in which indeed he seemed to have little part. He now struck the most vital blow of all. He attacked Rome in a new department. He wrote an "Address to the Nobles of the German People," in which he advocated the suppression of nunneries, abolition of the interdict and ban, independence of the temporal power, and the denial of transubstantiation and other false teachings of Rome. This was rebellion, and shortly afterwards brought its natural punishment from Rome — excommunication. Luther said, "I would regard the Pope as Pope, but they want me to regard him as God." He posted a notice on the church door, inviting the people to go out with him, in solemn procession, through the Elster Gate, and, in presence of the citizens, professors, and students, publicly burn the papal bull. This notice was observed, and, in presence of the multitude, Luther burned the bull on December 10th, 1520. But Rome was even worse off without him than with him. Charles V. had been elected Emperor of Germany on June 28th, 1519, and it was now a serious question what position he should take as to the reform. He was a Hapsburg, and therefore a rigid Roman Catholic; but he was also diplomatic, and was determined to do nothing that would endanger his political strength. He turned the matter over carefully in his mind, and, as at the Diet at Worms, April, 1521, his election contract was to be signed, and such additional business transacted as related to the affairs of the Church, he resolved, before the council met, that he would give Luther a hearing, and condemn his doctrines. Luther was summoned to Worms, and promised a safe conduct. Before starting, he wrote to Spalatin, "If his Majesty calls me to account, so that I am ruined, and am looked upon, on account of my answer, as an enemy to the empire, still I am ready to come; for I have no intention of fleeing, nor of leaving the Word in danger, but I mean to confess it unto death, so far as Christ's grace sustains me. But I am certain that the bloodhounds will not rest until they have put me to death." His friends reminded him of Huss's death at the Council of Constance, but their remonstrance had no influence. He would go to Worms, though "the devils were as many as tiles on the housetops." Every argument was used. Threats were multiplied, but all to no avail. When he had finished his defense, he said, "Here I stand. I cannot do otherwise. God help me. Amen." Carlyle describes the historical significance of this occasion, and the importance of Luther's firm attitude, in the following words: "It was the greatest moment in the modern history of men. English Puritanism, England and its parliaments, America's and vast work these 2 centuries, French Revolution, Europe and its work everywhere at present, the germ of it all lay there. Had Luther in that moment done otherwise, it had all been otherwise." The decree of the Diet at Worms against Luther was as follows: "Thus this individual, not a man, but one like the devil in human form, under a monk's cowl, has gathered into one noxious mass a number of heretics who have been long concealed, and hold most damnable heresies. And he has even devised some fresh ones, under pretense of preaching faith, which he has industriously made every one believe, in order that he may destroy the true faith, and, under the name and guise of evangelical doctrine, put an end to all evangelical peace and love and all good order." The sentence of ban and double ban was pronounced upon him and every friend and adherent to his heresy, and, after a certain date, May 14th, all persons were cautioned against harboring or protecting him, and he was ordered to be delivered up to the officers, wherever found. When Luther was returning from Worms, and before the publication of the ban against him, some knights, at the instance of Frederick the Wise, took him to the Wartburg Castle, on the heights above Eisenach, lest he might be captured by his enemies and possibly suffer death. He here lived as Junker George, Squire George, a sobriquet given him by the jovial knights. He used his pen vigorously during his 8 months in Patmos, as he called his sojourn. No day was without its line. While here he translated the New Testament entire, and parts of the Old. The New Testament was printed in September, 1522, and did more than anything else to make the Reformation permanent. It went through 16 original editions in 10 years, so great was the thirst for the Word, and the reprints in the same time amounted to 54. Luther's Bible was translated directly from the Hebrew and the Greek, with wonderful clearness and force of style, and is a fairly faithful version. It almost created the German language, crystallizing it in forms of strong, pithy, and expressive speech. End of chapter 4.